So I have this pitcher that I threw last week. It's been sitting in the damp box for a week. Pretty good and firm. Still soft enough that on the edge at the bottom here I can press a little bit and make an indent, um, but also firm enough that I can hold its shape. So I'm going to turn it upside down and center it on the wheel. Just tapping it a little bit, really just paying attention to this edge here. There's a little bit of a wobble to it because of the spout on the top, but I think I'm just going to leave it in this case. If that was much worse, I could take some clay and put a level on the piece to level the bottom a little bit. So keep an eye on that when you made the spout of the pitcher. Um, if it made the lip on level, you might need to level it out a bit. Put 3 pieces of wet clay down to hold the pitcher in place. And I'll start with the trimming. So before I put it on there, checking where the extra thickness is when I throw pitchers. Sometimes I'll have a bit of extra clay to trim off the bottom that I've left there for stability to be able to put some of the shape into the pot. So I know that I'm going to trim right about to that line right there, and I can take off a good half an inch or so from the outside diameter, which is about a 1/4 inch of thickness of wall. So when you start trimming, you get rid of the first layer is a lot of the dented clay, some little bumps and undulations in the clay from when it was wet. Try to establish the outside of the foot first. Create that little bit of a round in on the bottom, which will give the pitcher more of a lighter look, curving it in rather than having it come straight to the table. And to achieve more of that, I could carve off the outside of the foot here, trimming that foot diameter a bit. As I'm trimming, I can stop and press every so often to get an idea of how thick it might be. I'm actually going to take it off the wheel here and feel it again just to make sure that I am getting about the correct thickness. So it's a matter of looking down the top of the pot into the inside and feeling with my fingers, and it does feel about right. Maybe there's a little extra clay here still, but not getting too thin. It's always harder to get it back on center, especially because if you start trimming a little off center like I did on this. Okay. Cheat. Cheat by using the needle tool. Make a mark, put the needle tool directly in front of you. That mark you made, center it, and smooth that over. And start spinning it again. Now we're pretty good because the needle tool is cutting it all the way around. I want these lugs of clay to stick well to the bottom of the wheel, so I'll paint a little bit of water on them when I use them, especially the second, third, fourth time, adding water to them to keep them soft, but also that water will seal to the metal and keep it stuck there pretty good. You want to not get the water touching the clay because it'll stick to the clay. Go back to where I just take off, make this a little more smoother line rather than having that push out there at all at the bottom. Grab my sponge. Cut the inside of the foot first. And try to move the camera here so you can see more of a top view. Push that down. Alright, so I'm going to use the little trimming tool here. I'm going to start in the middle. And I'm doing this first to just kind of remove the clay using the smaller tool. Makes it a little bit easier. Stop and press lightly on there. Put in some pressure. Don't want to break through, of course, but also don't want to leave extra thickness at the bottom. That's the cause of a lot of cracking. Is the very bottom of a trimmed pot from here to here can be thicker than the walls leading to it, and you really want it to be, if you were to cut it in half, have that consistent cross section. So pressing lightly is a good way to judge that. The other way to judge that is looking at the outside of the foot and matching the point right there where my tool is touching to the point where my fingernail is touching in there, and imagining that as like a continuous plane with then this foot ring stuck on top. So you can use that as a judge. I'm also going to cut into this right now, make it a little bit lower, but also cutting into the corner and removing that excess material. Digging out the excess material from the corners will make your picture a little bit lighter, which is good. I don't want to make the foot too narrow. It might be actually a little too narrow for a picture now that I'm looking at it, but we'll see, because when it's too narrow, the diameter, then it's more wobbly. So I'm going to leave that thickness on there. I do want to trim, just skim the very top of the foot to remove the contaminated clay on the outside from how it was sitting on the board or the plaster. Get those crumbs out of there. And I'll go with my sponge and add some water to it. So I'm adding water to it with the sponge and then compressing with my finger. So my skin is compressing the clay, smoothing it, giving me some more defense against cracks forming. Also bringing the surface together from the thrown area below to the trimmed area. Because glaze covers that sometimes, but maybe you're going to leave it unglazed, or you use a Celadon, a translucent glaze. You can see those trimming lines through there. You can really see the grog poles where most clay bodies have some grog in it, so there's going to be some scratches left behind where the grog is pulled through the wet clay. Okay, bring this down. Sometimes I like to leave that sponging part until after I've taken the piece off and checked it one more time. Let's see here. Pick it up. Feels pretty good. It's got some weight to it because it's a decent size. Definitely didn't get too thin. See how it sits on the table and kind of judge now. You look at the form and see, do you have any extra clay sitting down here? Feels like it kind of pushes out from the inside there, so I'm not going to worry about that. Put a handle on it. I've got another picture here to trim. This one definitely has a lot of weight on the bottom just by looking at the outside. It's coming down here. I want to really cut that in a bit, and picking it up especially, I can feel that. I'm going to try to judge. I'm looking directly down into the center here. I'm looking at the interior diameter of the bottom, and I have my pointer finger right in the inside corner, and I'm using just the feeling of having my fingers close together to give me a baseline to start with. So I feel like that mark right there is about the thickness that I want to trim off. So it's a pretty good amount of clay. And then coming down, geez, a lot of clay in this one, right about there. So from there to there is what I'm working with. Place it upside down. I'm going to check it this time with a level. Keep the wheel from spinning, put it in two places. That's good. So I don't have to worry about leveling it. If it's off level one way, then what you do is just hold the level on there, grab a little clay, lift it up until you get it right, and stuff some clay under there. Adds another challenge to throwing, or rather centering to trim your thrown pieces. So always lucky when you don't have to do that. The reason that happens with pitchers is that you make the spout and it can throw it off a little bit. So I'm going to get this on center for the most part. Use my nails to see, especially on this outside here, if it's cutting pretty much all the way around, which this is, it's just dipping in a little bit where I grabbed it with my hands to take it off the wheel. Once it's cutting all the way around pretty evenly, you know you're good to go. My clay pieces smushed on the bottom. Use 3 pieces of clay. There's no reason to use more usually. Alright, so I'll start, since I'm going to take off so much on the outside, I'm going to use my little trimming tool here. And I'm trimming in all the way to that, almost to that fingernail mark. I want to have the foot ring correspond with the interior bottom so that it's a nice evenly constructed piece, but also I want to keep in mind that I want the foot ring to be fairly wide on a pitcher so that I have stability with when there's liquid in it that's being picked up and set back down on the table. So I look at these first steps as kind of like the utilitarian carving the material away first. And the way that I threw this, I had a lot of clay at the bottom, and then it dipped in a little bit, and then I still have extra to trim off all the way down to there. So just working first with the widest portion of it. Trimming, you want to go fairly quickly, as fast as you're comfortable spinning the piece. It is, if it gouges in it, your tool grabs onto the piece of spinning pottery, it could take off those little pieces of clay and send it flying. So you want to be aware of that. But the quicker it can go, the better, because you're only affecting this part of the clay as it cuts underneath the tool. So if it takes a long time to return, you're going to have less consistency. If it can go a little bit faster, you'll be able to carve it away and have it be a bit smoother process. Go to this bigger trimming tool to smooth out the clay, kind of taking off the high areas of that, what the littler tool was leaving behind. And I'll bring this down and try to make this trimmed section become one with the thrown section visually. Cut in a little bit. I know I have a lot of clay there, so what I want to avoid is any extra clay hanging out in this area. For some reason that seems to happen right at the bottom. There's a little extra lump typically. So it's looking a lot better. Probably a good time to take it off, check the inside, and put it back on. Take it off, and then yeah, I can still feel there's a lot of weight in it. I have to cut off the inside of the foot still. Pushing just a little bit with my thumb on the outside. I want to deform it, but I want to see if it gives way at all. It's back on. There we go. Let's see. Get that tap down center. That's pretty good. I'm just going to go right back to this tool that I was using last time and just cut in to kind of evenly remove a little bit more because of how heavy it felt when I picked it up. Trimming can be fun when you start to use the different tool heads, and you can play around with trimming lines from your throwing tools like you can with throwing lines from your fingers. A lot of times you end up smoothing them over, so it's just part of the process when you watch those lines go in and erase them and put them back, put back other ones. Okay, we'll move to the taller position here for the top of the foot. The bottom of the pot. You want to think about how thick you want your foot to be from the outside to the inside wall of the foot, and it's an aesthetic choice. Functionally, having it be wide enough is all you need. It can be skinnier or wider. I usually think about the width of the foot, consistency of the thickness of the walls of the pot. Make sure I dig into the inside corner of the foot to remove it. Sometimes extra clay will hide out in there. Stop the pot and press just slightly to see if it gives way at all. It's not. If it gives way, hopefully I'm catching it soon enough that it's not too thin. Alright, now go to the outside. This trimming tool, cutting underneath the foot in that corner to remove some extra weight and give the shape a little more elegance for some reason. I'll call it more elegant. Now on the very top of the foot here, or the whatever bottom of the pot, I'm just going to skim the clay to remove the very top layer of the clay. Go at the corner again. Alright, so before I use my sponge on it, I'm going to take it off. Just by weight, it feels still a little bottom heavy. I know I'm getting close based on the shape. Pressing on the inside with my finger opposite, I can sort of feel the clay shifting a little bit. I think the extra weight in this is on the wall on the outside. So I'll put it back on and shave off a little more and then use my sponge to finish it. Just removing a little bit more clay, keeping the same shape that I had introduced in there, but removing some clay. Remove a little bit on the inside too. Happy with that. I'm going to use a sponge. Sponge introduces the water, compresses the clay a little bit, but not. It also takes up some of the fine particles of clay, so I want to use my skin primarily to compress the clay with the water from the sponge. Press all of the grog, the thicker clay, the coarser clay rather, into the finer particles of clay, compressing it all together, which gives strength against cracking and also makes the outside look nice and consistent. The thrown portion to the trimmed portion. A little grog pools in this, so sometimes it takes a few passes. If I introduce a little bit more water to it, that helps, but don't just let the water sit on there. Compress it with your fingers. I'm mostly compressing with my left hand over here, but my right hand is also touching the clay, which helps it, if it were to come off center, just can feel if anything's going wrong with it. But also my skin is resting on the surface and compressing the clay slightly. Alright, there we go. All trimmed up. Ready for the handle. Alright, making a handle for a pitcher is the same idea as making a handle for a mug. It's just a little bit bigger because it's a pitcher. But you don't want it to be hugely massive, and you don't want the pitcher's handle to extend too far from the body of the pot, so I don't want to go overboard with it. But I have a nice wedged piece of clay here. Start making a carrot first, and then start the process of pulling. In the beginning, you can use more of your knuckles to kind of grab into it, but generally pulling a handle takes some practice. You want to pull it enough and not too much. Don't want to get it thin areas. I'm going to pull a little bit off the pitcher as well, so I can leave a little extra thickness to it. Let's see. So that's pretty good starting point. Set that down here. Grab a tool to cut it. I'll give myself plenty. Since I'm going to pull it thinner, I can not worry about it. You could pull the handle completely and then set it on the table like this. And in this case, I would make this the connection point, and down here you want to make it pretty close to where the finished handle is going to go directly on the side of the pot. That is an option if pulling off the pot is a little too difficult for some reason. This is my apron, I guess. I don't have a towel here to wipe my hands on. Alright, so the placement of the handle on the top of the pitcher and where it meets the bottom is an aesthetic choice, so you want to think about that. With the neck coming in here and the pitcher handle making the piece tip 4, typically I'm going to start right at the bottom of this neck here, so that the handle comes out and goes down. So I'm going to go directly opposite the spout, kind of have that in my eyesight, and then use a scoring tool on the back side, right at the top, to get that scored. And then down here, somewhere close to the bottom, I'll make the ending point. So I'll have a nice big handle that you can get your hand into, and I want to have it be fairly close to the edge of the pitcher. No reason to have it come out really far, and it's a balancing act. I want to have the user's hand right up next to the body of the pitcher. Go to this. You can also wrap these. If you pull this piece first, you can wrap it in plastic and come back to it. You don't have to do it right away. Sometimes that's beneficial if the clay you're pulling is extra soft, and your clay is going to be fairly leather hard. So if it's really wet, then it's going to shrink more, and the handle's more likely to crack at that connection. And it's something you'll learn to deal with. I'm using magic water to attach these. I have to go run and get a towel. Towel to wipe off your hands is very helpful. Okay, so I'm using magic water, which is water with a little bit of sodium silicate. That the sodium silicate has a way of helping to meld the clay together a little bit. So it helps with that connection. Again, keeping that connection from shrinking and cracking apart. Although the best thing you can do is try it slowly. So I've got the end of the coil scored, or the started pull, and then scored the pitcher. Now I'm going to push that together. Even pressure, kind of rocking from the bottom towards the top a little bit, and now pressing just directly against the side of the pitcher. I'm supporting it here in my back, supporting the back of the handle with my hand, so that it kind of gets on there in the correct shape. Now I can, with a mug handle, I can usually hold it upright. With the pitcher handle, it's a little too long. So I'm just going to rest it right there while I get this connection together really well. And I've got this little issue here where the handle, right where it meets, it's got this little divot, indent going there, and that's going to cause an issue. So I'm going to smooth the clay down and make sure that the widest connection, or the widest point, is right at the connection, and that it can taper evenly from there. So it just takes a little babying in this step to get rid of that little lump that is there, or at least mostly rid of it. So now it's widest at the bottom and then heads in from the inside and the outside. So now let's see if I hold this like this. Should be able to pull it so I can support the whole pitcher with my right hand from underneath. Get the handle going fairly straight. I want to pull now to get the final size and to capture the fluidity of the action of pulling the handle, which is similar to that of throwing. That extra length makes it more difficult, so pulling off, since I know I'm going to clip some of that off anyways, if I pull it off earlier in the process, it'll allow me to sculpt the handle a little better. I want to turn, so now I'm looking directly at it. Turn it all the way around. At least turn it from, I can easily turn it from its side, turn it this 90 degrees or 180 degrees. A little more difficult to get all the way to the other side, but turning your hand also will allow you to pull an even shaped handle rather than just being limited to the shape that your hand makes when you pull over and over again. That's something that you play with as you continue to make handles, and it sort of becomes an artist's signature. Handles are done very similarly each time because of muscle memory, and you figure out how you do it well and how you can make it look nice, and then you continue that. So maybe pressing in a little bit underneath, just with the inside of my thumb knuckle there, using the outside of my thumb, or my thumb on the outside, pressing in a little bit. So now here with the pitcher, a little more difficult. Hold on to it. So I've got the handle and the pitcher. Now I'm going to bring this up and play around with pushing, holding onto the bottom and controlling. Again, I don't want this going too far from the edge of the pot there, so if I put my hand in there, you can see there's about 2 widths of my hand. So maybe that's even a little much, so I brought it down just a little bit more. And with this excess at the back, I'm just going to pinch and break that off there, and now take a little bit of time to push in at the bottom of the handle and take a little care to form that, mold that, smooth that. Again, this is part of how each artist chooses to make a different handle and the aesthetic signature. Some people do it really quick and capture that. Some people take a little more time. I'm somewhere in between. Sometimes I feel like I take more time than I need to, and then sometimes I look at the finished product and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have just taken a little more time on that. And they all change. So you want to look down again, just like when you're pulling the handle, look at it from different viewpoints to make sure that it's taking on the shape that you want it to have. Pretty good. You can lift up a little bit from the inside. So all of this fussing with it right afterwards, you want to do a little bit, but generally speaking, the less you can do of that, the more fluid it will look, and the more you want to go with that. All right, so handle's on there. The last step is to stamp the pot, which I like to do right around the base of the handle. Got my E-stamp, so while the clay is nice and moist, stamp the pot. I've got my finger directly behind where I'm pressing that because it's a pretty hefty stamp, so I need to make sure I don't deform it too much, but a little deformation is okay because it's handmade. All right, so might be a good idea to store the pitcher upside down while the handle is still very wet. And what I'm going to do is put this back in the damp box and let it sit for a couple of days so that the leather hard clay and the very wet handle can even out in moisture consistency. If I left this to sit out in open air, it would definitely dry too quickly and I would have issues with cracking right along the edge there. So you want to pay very close attention to how you dry your handles, how dry your pot gets before you put the handle on there, and always considering that the handle clay is going to be quite a bit wetter, so it's going to have to shrink more than the leather hard clay that has already shrunk. So the damp box, going really slowly with that. If you don't have a damp box, wrap it tightly in plastic for a couple days, and then slowly start to remove the plastic and dry it in a controlled manner. Okay, picture number 2, handle number 2, sawdust on the table. Using the existing handle pulling carrot that I have from before. It's using my hand to first start to thin out the top a little bit. Grab a bucket of water, start to pull. Every time I pull the starting carrot, I'm turning the entire time the ball of clay at the top. That way I don't have to change the shape that I have this hand in. Just do that same motion. Turn the piece of clay. Push the board forward a little bit. Sit down on the table. Okay. Guess here how much to cut off, but giving myself what is going to be plenty extra. So with this one, I'll put a little dollop of clay at the top for a thumb rest, just as another variation. And start by scoring where the handle is going to go on the pitcher, so lining up directly across from the spout. And I can do that visually and then connecting the handle right at the bottom of the neck where the shoulder comes into the neck of the pot below the lip, so that the handle can start by coming up and off. If I put it on this bottom side, it's going to go straight down, which is just not the aesthetic I'm looking for. Not that you can't do that if you choose. Now I'll give myself plenty of space for this handle, trying to hold the vase straight up and down so that I can make my score marks down here low enough, but in the straight line, up and down. So that's good to go. We'll pick this up, tap a little bit of flat area there, score inside the handle, top where it'll attach. Now I'll get the magic water, which is water and sodium silicate mixed together, and a pinch of Epsom salts to keep the sodium silicate suspended, and the sodium silicate helps with the connection. So I like to use it on handle connections because the clay you're attaching the handle to is always a little bit drier than or a lot of bit drier than the handle clay you're using. So I'm going to rely on the score marks here and a good amount of pressure to really get this attached, and take some time to smooth this together. Now that that's on there pretty good, just take some of this extra clay, make a little ball. Just eyeballing all of this stuff. Score the ball of clay. Score on top of this handle here, this attachment, and the neck of the pitcher body. Dip the scoring tool in a little magic water, attach that on there. Now I'm going to smush this in place, supporting the handle from underneath while I start to press this piece of clay in there. Get that pressed, and then smooth together the top like this. And now when I pull it, it'll be like pulling one piece of clay rather than sticking a piece on top. Alright, so now as I pull this, pulling that extra dollop of clay in the handle together as one will make it a more cohesive look than pulling the handle and then sticking the piece of clay on there to finish my thought. Alright, so holding the pitcher from underneath, put the tool right underneath to catch some of the water. Holding the pitcher from underneath with my right hand, really supporting it. And these first few pulls right afterwards are you want to get the whole piece of clay saturated. I'm going to clip off the bottom just to take off that extra amount of clay that I know I won't need. Help me pull it a little more evenly. And right here, up here at the top, I want to make sure that I get my hand right at that connection and turn it around and get that dollop of clay, push my thumb into it. That little thumb rest. Now working, generally speaking, I want the thickest part of the handle at the top to go down to the thinner part, and then the way that I pull the handle, then there's a little thickness at the bottom. And so as I get that, I like to pull that off so that doesn't have my hand hang up at the bottom and stretch some of the clay here towards the top. So that looks pretty good. Now, draw my hand off so I can hold onto the pot a different way. Actually, what I want to do here, I want to support this. Bring it all the way over. Now I can play around with the handle. I put a little crick in it. It's difficult with the size of this vase, or this pitcher rather. So I'll try that again. this, I want the handle to start coming up off the shoulder. Just use one more pass with water to smooth that out again. I need to use the table here. Okay, there we go. Now I can hold this up. I turn it over. This is not for someone with smaller hands than me. Picture this size. There we go. So now we're getting it to lay on there and look pretty fluid, pretty normal. But I can take a little time here, make sure that the handle doesn't come too far away from the pitcher, so that it's not. It's more functional when it's closer to it. It's easier to grab onto. And the way that this lays on there, I'm just going to press in right where my score marks are, towards the bottom of the pot, and then pinch onto this and rip that clean, bring it to a kind of a point, and then spend a little time fussing with that to make that connection look like, for my handles, it's generally to make it look like it's pulling from the top and then attached but not fully formed, smoothed into the bottom. That's just the way I've been making them. Sometimes I change. Usually I don't. Looking at the handle from different vantage points to make sure that it's going pretty straight. I've got some little marks in the handle from how I had to handle it as I was awkwardly turning it over, so I'm just going to use a little water to erase those. Compress that. Try not to mess with the curve, because the curve is in there from the process, and if I mush it around too much, I lose the fluid look I'm going for. Just one of many ways to attach a handle to a pitcher. So there it is. So what I'm going to do now is wrap it in plastic, or I'm just going to put it in my damp box and leave it for a few days. This clay is sopping wet. This clay is pretty dry. It's actually a little on the wetter side of leather hard, so that's going to help out, so that as this really wet clay shrinks, it's hopefully not going to shrink away from the pot that it's attached to.